Good afternoon. It's really good to see everybody. My name is Brian Shim. I'm a solutions architect with 941 Consulting, and with me is Bennett Norton, who's our president. We got into this idea. This is a big one because a lot of people. Well, let's show of hands. Who's had to create Bootcamp instances in their edu business? This is about everybody, right? So everybody's been through this pain before. What we're going to try to do is take a lot of the pain out of the process, and that means a lot of the clicking, a lot of the babysitting. You may still have to check in on it now and again, but it's not going to take you 3 hours of babysitting to get through one of these computers. Hopefully, that's the goal here. So that's us. We are also going to share this slide deck, so don't feel like you have to take notes furiously. We've got a lot. We've also got an appendix at the end of this guy. It's going to have a little bit more material that can help you guys out. So why did we do this? We started this project a year back. At that time, I was working at a school, and I know you were just thinking, a school, what does a school have need for all these Bootcamp devices for? Well, I guess our school ran a couple of special programs for their students and for their staff and faculty. I'm just going to bring up two examples. One was the debate team at the school, and the other was the robotics team. I'm going to get into the robotics bit. It's a little bit more fun. They needed the Windows side to be fully functional. We tried to do this in VMs. We tried to do this via Citrix. None of it worked. You just have to have that performance and that horsepower on the box for that to work. So that was part of the driving decision behind why we did this. So why bring all this in? You could get a person to do that for the robotics team, couldn't you? Our robotics team had 65 members in it. I don't know about you guys, but I do not want to make 65 Bootcamp instances. That sounds like some kind of nightmare to me, so I would never want to do that. We are going to, we're going to talk about the creation of a clean base Windows install. We're going to explain how to automate Windows MDM enrollment because that might be important. It was very important to us. As soon as we got into 100 machines, we didn't want them unmanaged out in the wild. So we're going to get into that. We're going to explain how to automate Windows provisioning. That's also very important. You probably need some setup. And we're also going to briefly discuss Boot Runner. Boot Runner is a front end that you can put at the end of in front of your end users to choose OSs. So at the end of the day, when this is all done, this might be something that you see right here. This includes Boot Runner. You can see there's ways to boot into Mac, into Windows, and even into Linux if you want. So this right here is going to be the goal, everybody. So why really did we even need Windows? These questions come up all the time with admins. And I think no matter what organization you're in, whether it be education, business, nonprofit, there's always a need for Windows. You're always going to have somebody in accounting or somebody in business or somebody's doing something with some other app that only runs in Windows, but it always comes up. And it's not something that you can afford to ignore. And it wasn't for us either. So that's why we really just dove into this and tackled it while we could. What does it take to make a Bootcamp computer normally? I'm going to sort of short estimate this. So if we're going to do a fresh Bootcamp install, that could take, say, 30 minutes just to lay down a non-configured OS, right? Your first login could be another 5 to 10 minutes. You have smaller tasks like manual binding, antivirus, and app installs. And all this stuff together is easily going to add up to more than an hour per machine. I was very conservative. I found that this could be over 2 hours per machine, honestly, when you're babysitting this. So this might be pretty good. All right, great. So before I move to the next slide, I just wanted to just say this. I understand that we are among experts here. There are many different ways to get this thing done, I think. There's no reason to, do it exactly the way we do, or if you've got a better way, awesome, do it that way, share it with us, And I think that's kind of what this is all about, right? We've got this slide here. Here we go. This is going to go through a pretty quick video. We're going to launch it off in self-service. This is going to download a package that's going to partition and copy data to the Windows drive, at which point you reboot. This is an automatic enrollment process that's happening here, again, through the magic of video editing. This is going to be the machine provisioning project that happens. And again, this is all kind of kicking off, on its own. And by the time we're done, ta-da, we've got something that we can present to our end user.
It's going to take that long, right?
Oh, excuse me, it's not going to take 60 minutes. Well, actually, time-wise, I should frame it this way. Time-wise, it may take 60 minutes, but your effort-wise is not going to take 60 minutes anymore. I think that's the important part. We want to be managing systems and frameworks, not individual machines, right? So what did we do? We created a Bootcamp partition, copied data to it. That's deploying that disk image. And then we added provisioning customizations. So let's keep going here. How did we configure all this? These are the tools that we used. Again, we are among experts. I understand there are different ways to do this. These are the tools that we used at the time. So, of course, we've got Jamf Pro. I'm really hoping this one's a little bit obvious here at this conference. The next one is Ivanti LANdesk. This is a Windows MDM solution. That's really nutshelling it. It does a lot. If you wanted to think of Ivanti as the Jamf of the Windows world, I don't think that's a completely inappropriate comparison to make. We've also got Winclone Pro, that's from Two Canoes. Winclone is definitely a necessary part of this. It's necessary to capture the Bootcamp image, as well as export it into a PKG that we can deploy using Jamf. So what are we also using? Apple Bootcamp. We also have one Windows instance to create the config file. We're going to be creating an unattend file. You are going to need kind of just an instance of Windows to do that. The Windows System Image Manager. Same deal, Windows install ISO. Of course, this goes without saying, but I wanted to put it up there. You need to have a Windows ISO to pull data from. And that last one out there is Boot Runner by Two Canoes. Excuse me. That was the bootloader screen that you saw there. I'm going to pass this now to Bennett, and we're going to get into how to prep for Winclone capture.
All right. Okay, so you guys are here for a reason. I'm assuming you're doing some sort of initiative similar to. Is it because you have Macs that need Bootcamp on them and you're continually re-imaging them? How often are you guys doing it? Every day, every week, every semester? Semester? Okay. And do you do that because of Windows rot, or do you have to re-provision apps on it? What drives this continual process to rebuild? Updated software? Okay. You can't patch it otherwise? Is that kind of what's going on? Okay. All right. And additional stuff, right? The needs are various, and it's always going to happen. And so what we did is Brian kind of showed you that nice little overview so you could see how we ended up being able to automate this thing kind of start to finish. And using the power of Jamf and bringing in these different tools, we could inject the right information at the right time. And I think that's what's kind of critical here is, whether we need to update apps, whether we need to patch the system, maybe it's just a clean refresh, this is how we went about doing it. So I'm going to walk through kind of each phase, but I want to get your feedback as we go through this. This is a small enough crowd where we can talk about your specific use cases, right? So where we started was, we got to build a nice Windows machine that we can use and redeploy. Now, as an industry, we're trying to walk away from that monolithic image, right? We don't want to deploy that out because it's out of date almost instantly. And so we tried to tackle this in a way where we could inject real-time all of the data, whether it be packages, machine names, everything like that could code down kind of the last second. We did that all at the end of our process. So really when we said we prepped this Winclone capture, we kind of wanted to keep it as bare bones as possible so that we could have more of that DEP-like provisioning experience with our Windows image. So we used Ivanti to do the actual provisioning of the Windows operating system. Now, you could plug in whatever tool you wanted to do there, and we're going to kind of show you how we modularized it enough to where if Ivanti's not your Windows management of choice, plug in whatever else you happen to be, right? And if you do have questions about the processes we're going through, that please ask. So what we did is we created a self-contained agent from Ivanti. This allowed us to inject that agent into the process at time of install. Right? Now, why do you not want to stick a systems management agent in your image? What was that? Can you do that? Oh, yeah, dupe it, right? So generally, every systems management tool that I've ever used creates some sort of GUID, right? And so now you have to go through and start cleaning out all of the specific stuff that happened during time of install. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to mess with it. So we thought, we'll just take this self-contained agent and inject it in real time, and we'll show you how we did that. Now, obviously, we needed to have the latest Windows ISO installer, and that, Brian mentioned, it seems kind of obvious, but why do you need the ISO installer for Windows System Image Manager? Any of you guys used SysPrep before? Okay, what do we need it for when we're building our unattend file? You needed to build the unattend file, exactly, because there's difference between platform versions, right? And so before you can even build an unattend file, it says, give me your ISO so I know if you're working with Windows 7, Windows 10, or whatever. So that's obviously a critical piece to this. And then we needed to have the Windows System Image Manager, and then we needed to build a custom unattend file. So that process there is going to be pretty straightforward for most of you when it comes to building the unattend file. You're going to stick in your admin account, right? Put in whatever default stuff you're going to have, whether it be home page. But there were a couple of things that were unique that we needed to do. So we tried to do little videos here for you so you could see what was happening. We may have sped them up a little bit too fast so that you could figure out what's going on here. Does that go automatically, or do I have to hit something? So in our unattend file, we included a couple of asynchronous processes here. And that more or less let us go in and say, all right, as soon as you unpack this Windows image, we want you to do a couple of things. And we want you to do this in a specific order. And one is, we need to install the Ivanti agent. Pretty straightforward, right? So that's where you can plug in whatever systems management tool of choice is. So as part of your first asynchronous process, install your agent. Then we went in, the second thing we did was have it kick off an inventory scan. So again, similar to whatever tool you're going to use, you want it to be able to update your systems image or your systems management tool so that it has all of that inventory data. And there's one other thing that is important to this, and that is making sure that you're able to properly sysprep it and shut it down, right? So that's really what the unattend file is giving us. If we just clone it and not do that proper sysprep, we're going to run into issues down the line, kind of like that same dedupe process, right? We won't have hit that. So any questions on creating our unattend file here? Yes? Yeah. Yep, just put in your SCCM agent. This really should be able to be kind of plug and play with whatever tool that you have there. Yep. And we'll kind of break out the different process there when it comes to the actual image. But yeah, stick in your SCCM agent, have it run its standard inventory scan, and you should be able to at least see that respective machine in your systems management tool. This is Windows System Image Manager. So if I go back.
Part of the ADK?
Yes, it's part of the ADK. If you install the Automated Deployment Kit, or ADK, you'll get that tool there. Yeah, so we had to install a Windows 10 machine in our environment. Good. Other questions on building this process or kind of prepping? I obviously didn't put in here the parts where you're going to customize the image to whatever degree you want to. However, again, kind of going back to that beginning, we wanted to keep this as vanilla as possible so that it was easy to make updates. And then we injected everything else into our provisioning template down the line. Okay? All right. Moving on to part number 2. So we captured our image using WinClone. Now this was a challenge for us, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah, yes.
We started this process and we thought, oh, well, we can do this with using ImageX for maybe build a WIM file, right? But we found that we couldn't get the partition to lay back down correctly without using WinClone. So that's why this is a terrific tool. We brought it in and it just made perfect sense. It made everything seamless to us. Because when we captured it with Ivanti, again, we weren't able to put the partition back down once we were going down to the Mac, right? And so that was a critical piece to this whole process. So what we did is we built this Bootcamp Windows 10 machine, kept it as vanilla as possible. I put in here customize, so do whatever customizations you want. Then run sysprep with OOBE and shut it down. So out of the box experience, that's going to generalize everything. Get rid of the machine name. If you bounded the domain, it's going to throw all that away, so just don't do that. Just keep it as clean as possible. Then we installed WinClone on a Mac. Now, who's here used WinClone before? Anyone? Okay. Is it a simple tool? It's awesome. But what's the key piece that you have to do? You have to hook that Windows machine to a Mac via some sort of target disk mode. So you choose your cable of choice, whether it's USB-C or anything else, but you got to get those two devices talking. And that's how WinClone is going to be able to see it and capture that image. So we kind of have that down as that second to last piece, and then we run the capture. So we've got a little video here walking through the process of what you click through. We just pointed to the machine, and we're able to capture that Bootcamp partition that we had built. Pretty straightforward. Not too difficult. Any questions on that part? All right. So at this point in our process, we've got our Windows image that's kind of ready to go. Now, in a perfect Windows world, I would just build right from the Wim file that came from the Windows installer. So we kind of had to inject a couple of pieces in here that we don't normally have to do. So with that, that took us over to step 3, customize the WinClone capture. Now, you're probably going, you just told us not to customize, and now you're telling us to customize. This was because, as Brian had talked about, we had different departments with different needs. So if I have this very generic template and I want to automate the entire process, I need to somehow identify group of machine A versus like group of machine B. Or in his case, we had robotics. And then what was the other team?
Debate.
Debate, right? So we had these two different kind of business units. And so what we ended up doing is we injected into our WinClone image our unattend file. We injected into the WinClone image our Ivanti agent. And then we injected a text file. And that text file was simply a way for us to demark it from a different type of platform. So in the end, we ended up with 2 of these WinClone. We took these WinClone captures and we converted them into a deployable PKG that we could stick into Jamf self-service, right? And we had 2 of them. And really the only difference at the end of it was a single text file that had robotics in the name of one and debate in the name of the other. So in you guys, how many deployments would you end up having? Do you have to even customize this, or could you just throw it all into one image? You can throw it into one image. That makes your life even better. So if at that point you could inject some of the stuff that we're doing here, you could just build it into your image itself, put the files down. Maybe you don't need to change them. We just wanted to do this in a modular fashion so that we knew we could go back in, and if Ivanti released a new agent, we just copy the new executable in there, and then we're running that latest version of the agent and didn't have it embedded into our Windows image. Other questions about this part? We didn't install any applications at this point. We'll get to that where we do the application installs, where we bind to the domain. But really what we were doing here was, how can I find a way to make it look a little bit different so that when I got down the road and I had a whole list of applications for the debate team that were not going to go down to the other department. That's when we got specific with it. So it's really just a text file. Okay? Other questions? Yeah. Yes, should be. It should be, and that's kind of what we'll get to. And so the question was, can SCCM do everything from here on out, right? And the idea is yes. That's what we're hoping. So what we needed to do is be able to get this Mac, it was these iMacs, and we needed to be able to get them into a state where SCCM could pick up, or Ivanti could pick it up and run with it. Because, hey, I know what to do with that Windows machine, because we've been able to abstract the iMac hardware from it at that point, right? And so this little file was something that we had to go back and inject at this point in the process, because when we got to the next phase, we needed to do that. So how did we customize that WinClone capture? It's really just a matter of mounting this thing, and then we took these files that we had and we shoved them in there and then converted it to a PKG. WinClone does this. This is another powerful part of using the WinClone product. Okay? So I'm not here to sell you Tucanu software, but it was a real plus for us in our process here. All right. So now that we had this nice part, we needed to get into the SCCM side that you were talking about. In our case, we used Ivanti. And in order for Ivanti to be able to see certain files, we had to customize the managed software list. So basically, let's think about this for a second. When an inventory scanner runs for any product, it's going to pick up your standard executables and things like that. Maybe your registry keys if you're looking at, obviously in the Windows side of things. Well, we had these text files that were sitting there on the hard drive. And we needed to tell that scanner, hey, go look for that text file so that we know if you're a debate team or robotics team. So that is a piece that we had to customize with inside of Ivanti. Now, Ivanti does that natively in their GUI. You just have to make it available. You have to tell it, hey, go find that name of that file or the location of the file, whatever you wanted to do there.
If I may, sorry, right quick, that file and what we're creating, this query, This could be equated to an extension attribute that we're checking for
Mhm.
on the Mac side, so that
Yeah.
would,
Yep, very good point. And we wanted to basically build a smart group. Now, you guys know what smart groups are in Jamf. That's why we're using those files. And so we built a query that would go and look for that specific file. So at the end of this process, we could have it running, on a constant check. So every hour we had this task that was running against these smart groups or queries that would say, hey, is there a new machine here? Is there a new machine there? And so it didn't matter when we started that provisioning process, we knew that within an hour it was going to kick off the rest of the Ivanti piece, okay, and just image this thing. So that's what we did. We created that file that we looked for, we built a query out of it, and then we went into the build provisioning templates piece. This is kind of going back to your question where we put in all of our software and our customizations around managing it. And then we just had this policy running, like I said. Now, the policy window inside of Ivanti is 1 hour. And so we just set that to run every single hour. And it made it nice. So if we built a machine and it was at like minute 58, that thing kicked off within 2 minutes of it going, right? If we happened to catch it at minute 2, then we had to sit around and wait 58 minutes, or we could kick it off manually. But we were trying to absolve any IT intervention in our process. So as long as they plugged it in and started the beginning piece through that Jamf self-service, then the rest of it should have taken care of it. Okay, so how did we kind of do these different pieces? This is going to be specific to the platform that you're on, and hopefully you can kind of see these, but this was a way for inside of Ivanti going in and say, hey, scan for this file. There's a guy back here named Dave Zabrowski. If you ever have Ivanti questions, go talk to Dave. Raise your hand, Dave. He's not even going to raise his hand. He's like, no, don't go talk to me. Guy's a genius in all things IT, by the way. So, Dave, there's your plug to become a consultant. All right. There, Dave at, okay. Said don't give out his email address. So we customized that. This is how you create a query inside of Ivanti, no different than doing the smart group. And then we came in here and we build our provisioning template. So this is going to be similar to runbooks in other products. It's going to, you're going to build your specific process here. So for us, all we wanted was to configure all of the things specific to, this happened to be the robotics one. Okay, so it's hard to read that. I can't even read it from where I'm standing here, but we did things like changing the power preferences. So we're getting into some of those settings around the machine. We installed certificates. We put down all of our applications. We established bandwidth controls so the machine could behave like we wanted it to. We set the machine name. We bound it to the domain. I'm trying to think, what else did we do? We did antivirus, Office, all of the robotics apps. So really this is the power of it. Because the way the provisioning template works in Ivanti is, these are all just pointing to packages. So when I had to update the package, let's say 3 months from now, the provisioning template just installs the latest update, similar to what we do inside of SCCM as well, right? And Jamf. So that's kind of the power of building those provisioning templates, and it just spits out this really nice machine as if it were a full Windows box when we were done with it. So the end of this was the automated part where we just scheduled that template to run every hour. Any questions on that part? You guys might not be Ivanti customers, so it's not going to apply across the board, but the idea of what we did should apply and be applicable. Questions? Now you guys are quiet, so we're going to get done fast, and you're like, oh, that's good. Let's go home. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Brian take over for a little bit and talk about the boot runner piece and how we configured some of these subsequent processes.
All right, great. Thank you, Bennett. Boot runner again. This is by the same company who made Winclone. It's by Two Canoes. If you're talking about ease of use, simplicity, power, and consistency, that's kind of what you're going to get with this. We did this, again, this was at the school I used to work with. We did this because there are going to be students with these computers. All of us know how to hold option and choose, and EFI password log if we need to, and choose an OS. These kids, they're not going to remember this kind of stuff, not all of them. So we really wanted to make a GUI to do that. So it came in 3 parts. We created the boot runner config profile. That's done online. It's free. We download the boot runner configuration profile that we made, and then we download boot runner like itself and the license and its install packages. So these might be hard to see. I just put these up as examples. These are not for reference, but This is just to show you, hey, if you go to profiles.2canoes.com and you see something like this, you're in the right place. If you really wanted to zoom in on this, it's in the slide deck as well. And you can get into some pretty granular options in terms of when operating system can boot, cannot boot, what kind of timers you have. You can set date restrictions. So it's actually just pretty nice. So again, that's going to be profiles.2canoe.com to do this. We upload that config profile into our JPS since it natively just knows how to handle that. And from there, you can just scope it out to whoever has boot runner. I made an extension attribute at one point just to show if the privileged helper tool exists, the boot runner helper tool. It just says a true-false Boolean. And anything that said true, they're scoped to get this stuff, like the boot runner app as well as its configs. Let's see. So what do we need to do to create the policy in our JPS? Okay, well, we need to import our configuration profile. We briefly talked about that already. We're going to need to upload our boot runner packages. Those are going to go into Casper admin just like anything else. And then we create that policy. What we ended up doing is creating a whole Jamf Bootcamp policy that included this boot runner as a part of it. You don't have to do it that way. We just tied them together because they always went together for us. So again, I'm just going to call out what I see here. It's a really, really simple process. In this case, there's a boot runner policy. It's ongoing. There's a custom trigger called boot runner, and there's a trigger for self-service. What did we need in here? We just needed base boot runner app. That's a PKG. Easy. What did we need? Licensing. Great. Licensing can be made into a PKG and delivered the same way. Awesome. The third item up here says boot runner support files, and that is not necessary, but we did that because we wanted to upload a custom background for our guys. So that's kind of where, that's all that is, just a JPEG sitting in a specific location, and our config profile tells boot runner where to get that background from. This is the Jamf Bootcamp install policy. It looks like there's a lot of stuff going on here. I just wanted to break it down. The stuff at the bottom underneath update inventory, like change startup just to current, reboot, reboot. And if you're going to reboot, display this message. I'm just going to ignore that. We see this on every policy we create, right? So we'll just kind of skip that part. At the top, what did I do? I'm just going to tell you what I did and why I did it. And if you have any questions, please pop up, and I'm happy to help answer any questions. But the initial script there is just to caffeinate this guy for an hour. Because I've had a lot of people, their computers just go to sleep while they're downloading or even while the thing is installing. So we had some problems there. Great. Just fix it by caffeinating it for 1 hour. That second bit you see there, that's the Ivanti debate. That's like the Winclone PKG, and when I put it up into Casper admin, it did zip the PKG for me. So that's running. We've got a Unix command set to run Jamf policy event boot runner. That's just to kick off that the boot runner magic. We've got a script to kill caffeine at the end. And I've got another script in there. And these are not scripts per se. They're just commands wrapped up into a script shell. But that last one for inventory manage is just a, sudo jamf recon, sudo jamf manage, because I want to make sure those config profiles make it into that computer sooner rather than later. Does anybody have any questions so far? We feeling pretty good? All right, cool. Let's see.
I think we're back to where we started there.
Oh, yes, didn't we? So, I'm looking here, and I think really what we need to remember, and, again, I just want to establish this, is that this is not the only way to do this. So please, if you wanted to share better ways to do it, I'm all ears. We would just love to keep improving. So this is, I guess this is where it all starts. Let's see, here we go. So what are we going to need before we start? We have just maybe one caveat there, I guess, and that's just to make it easier for you. Whatever your client machine is going to be, your target machine, you don't want it to have like 8 partitions when you take it through this process. It's just going to break. It's not going to work. So probably best to start with a Mac that just has its own Mac partition. The PKG that comes out of WinClone to lay down all of your windows, it can be told to create you a new partition. It can be told to create a percentage of that partition, then restore to it. I end up just creating one that gives me a set, like say 40, 50 gigabytes or something like that, and just deploys it like that. It just simplified things for me a little bit.
And I think that's a critical part of that process, Brian, because when we went and did this, we didn't know if we're going to have to touch every machine and build that bootcamp partition before we started. And that's not the case. You can take a clean Mac and then end up with the Apple Bootcamp partition through the process.
In fact, I'll tell you, I was messing around with this, and I was like, I wonder what triggers this will work with, and it seems to be every one. Like I did this at imaging time. provisioning time. We're on High Sierra now. So I added this as a part of our provisioning process just to test it out. I made it the last item on there. Worked great, you know. So if this is something you want to roll up into your provisioning process, I'd say do it. It's awesome. All right, great. And here we are, back to where we started here. So that's how we got here. The computer in between will have rebooted a few times. If you're staring at it, you'll have stared some status bars for some time. But at the end of the day, this is what you can get to your employees, your students, your clients, whoever you need to do. And so that sort of wraps up like what we had to present. Did anybody have any questions? It is. And you could Google how to do that. There'll be 30 articles on how to do that. Yeah. Yes.
Been imaging a long time.
Yeah. Oh.
So I've been imaging a long time. I'll use my coach voice.
All right.
Been imaging a long time.
Coach voice, yeah.
Yeah. So I can't get past the idea that I don't want to hit Command R and download that base image for the macOS every single time. Every year we reimage. So are we really going to do that in the DP age? Or are we going to go ahead and build a base image of that and keep it on campus?
Oh, you're talking about it for Mac or for Windows?
Yes.
Mac.
Okay.
Mac.
Well, I've found that I haven't had to use imaging for Mac to kick this off at all. I just use the standard provisioning process, which is just get that OS, that vanilla OS onto that Mac somehow.
Right, but if we image every year, you don't want to drag that.
No,
yeah.
no. Use the startOS install command from the installer, and you can, even on a T2 Mac, you can use that to reimage it, to put down a clean OS.
Command line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you drill down into the app file, the startOS install command will let you do that.
It's good to get into that sooner rather than later, just because, imaging is just very, very quickly going away. And I was a little bit used to imaging myself, but I got to say, just working through a few questions, it's not that bad. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the Windows R command takes way too long. We don't want to do that. Yeah.
And for the Windows side, I also wanted to mention this. I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that up. The Windows side, that gets to be a problem because, like Bennett said, almost instantly it's out of date. We showed this brief video, and the appendix in our slide deck also shows a few screenshots. You can take it at your pace. But when I started this last year, there was no way to create an image from a WIM file using these tools. I had to create a gold master or whatever master image, sysprep it, and then just pray that everything was going to block copy okay. But since WinClone 7 has come out, there's a way to create a sysprepped image straight from WIM, and it takes like a minute and a half or something. It's really great. So the key is really, I think it's the tool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I have a question. I used to use WinClone, I think, versions back, and we stopped using it for this particular, well, not this particular process, but just making Bootcamp images off of it.
Yeah.
Because I used to have to build the Windows environment on a like-for-like system, or else it would blue screen when I brought it over to the Mac. That was one of the, so I would have, the only way around it is whatever system I was making, so I had multiple WinClone WIM, basically WIMs out there for depending on what hardware you had. So if I had an iMac or a Mac Mini or MacBook, I would have to grab that specific WinClone and put it on that specific device, or else it would blue screen automatically.
Quick question. Was that on High Sierra at all? Or
No, this was
prior?
This is it was Windows 7 back then. Okay.
Hardware thing too. There used to be some nuances that were even just re-imaging a Mac, you would have to do that. So like a MacBook Air late 2011, and there have been a lot of changes on the Apple side that have streamlined that, so you no longer really have to worry about, or you shouldn't have to worry about that any longer.
Yeah, that was a big, back maybe 2-3 years ago, that was huge. But we used to use WinClone a lot. That was one of the things I was running.
And the thing that I saw through troubleshooting, and this is early in the process as I'm even just making Windows images, I'm like, why is this captured image not working on another computer? I could lay down the data, it looks like it's all checking out okay. Just wouldn't boot, it would blue screen or it would give me some weird, And I think at the time it was because of SIP. When we were doing that, hopefully nobody's messing around with SIP anymore. I'm talking about last year when we had to mess with that, so that could be a factor as well. Yeah.
In our use case, though, we captured from a like machine to a machine, right? Or
Yes.
did you capture like from a MacBook and put it on an iMac?
Actually, I tested both. When I sys-prepped them, and I removed SIP from all of our test computers, that seemed to work okay, but it was pretty vanilla after sysprep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you'll get some advantages going back to just pulling right from the ISO file, because then it's never installed. And then we got to just make sure we get the Bootcamp drivers back in there. I think there was a question down here.
Yes.
So could you speak to why you chose Bootcamp instead of a virtual machine type?
Oh, it was
solution?
performance all the way. We tried, in fact, gosh, I mean, we tried so hard to get VM to work and try to get students to just adopt it. Hey, look, this is what it's going to be. But, you know, it wasn't happening. And so, yeah, the decision was made later on down the line, look, we really should just pursue this instead. Oh,
Can you
yes.
talk a little bit more about Bootcamp drivers and how you were putting them in there? Because I guess
Yeah.
our challenge is kind of like what we've been talking about a little bit is
You
we'll
made it.
create the image on a MacBook, and then we want to make it available to everybody in self-service, but they might be using a 2013 iMac or a 2017 iMac. So I'm
mind
not
if
sure
I-
if you guys have figured out a way to easily solve that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it won't like instant maybe, but again, your tools might differ. But in Ivanti, we can create multiple provisioning templates. And so those templates can be like 95% the same except for the Bootcamp drivers. And that's what we ended up doing, you know. So we have a little tag file in there for 13-inch pros, 15-inch pros. And so depending on which smart group essentially it goes into, it'll get the proper provisioning that way. Yeah. Also, by doing it that way, it makes it a lot easier down the road when Bootcamp drivers are updated. We just take that module out and just replace it with a new one. Yes.
So we looked at boot camp and stuff before. We're a college. What do you do to make sure that both sides of the OSs are getting patched, where if they like sit in one
Oh,
for forever, like,
that's a good question. Well, again, I'm going to take it back to where I was. We were a Mac one-to-one school, so that's the side I worried about. I wanted to make sure everybody's okay on that. On the Windows side, I honestly, and not that everybody can afford to do this, I wasn't paying much attention, but this was before all of this. Like, this is when I was making one-off Bootcamp instances, and there was like 30 of these kids with just, I can't believe I made 30 of these, you know? And at the end of the day, I was like, man, you know, if something's messed up with that thing, I would just do it over again at this point. You know, we had no way to manage it. So that's why we chose, I mean, we were like looking everywhere. I mean, we looked at like Semantics Altiris and a couple other PC solutions, and then we came into Ivanti, and it was just it for us.
And Ivanti does do the patching, which is helpful when you have the agent on there, but it becomes a fully managed thought process at that point. I mean, you have to treat it just like you would any physical machine. And hopefully your systems management tool of choice can handle that patch process for you. Anything else, guys?
Come on, keep them coming. I know everybody's tired, but come on, it's JNUC.
You mentioned the start OS from term or wherever it was from, because usually I just Command R, wipe it and give a fresh image. You said the start OS is a better way to go? Or,
Well, it's
or I can
quicker.
move from a USB
To me,
drive
it's just quicker to, I can download the installer once and run a refresh, right? So in this case, I can deploy a package and just say, hey, I want you to reinstall the OS. And you can bootstrap your MDM enrollment app right from the start there using that start OS install command.
Yeah, I think for the workflow that I think he's talking about is like we get our Macs burn and turn quickly. Not yearly, but like say some people are here in our environment for like a project. We got 10 guys that have Macs. Now we're about to put them back into our fleet, but before we just kind of had some sensitive information, we want to wipe them.
Right.
He command R's all those to get them back. That process is lengthy.
Yeah.
So they start to stack up because it takes so long.
Are
So-
you using Jamf to manage your Macs?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. If I may just suggest, this is like a real rudimentary way to do it maybe, but if you capture a DMG of your install macOS Mojave or whatever you're going to do, lay that down in whatever locations. It could be in applications if you wanted to, right back where it started, just as long as the script that calls to it knows where it is. And that's what makes it so convenient. You can automate it. You can put it on a trigger instead of having to, you know, and wait. So.
Yeah. There's a nice flag. As Dave's saying, there's just a flag that you can say erase system, right? And and bring it right back to as if it were a brand new Mac without having to go through the internet download. So if you can image it, great, but all these new T2 whatever MacBook Pros, that process doesn't work, right? So we need to be able to refresh differently, and that's what we've been doing, is using the StartOS install command. Good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I've got 30 Macs in a lab, right? And I have taken one of them to the shop and manually installed Sierra and High Sierra and tried all that. And I've been working on Bootcamp for a year also, and I have no slides to show. Just a bunch of pain, just a bunch of grief.
Oh.
That's not the story. The question is, I know because on the Macs that I've upgraded manually, when I do internet recovery, I clearly have a different BIOS than I do on the others that I haven't upgraded manually, because I get offered the newest versions of the macOS from internet recovery. But if I go back to the lab on Yosemite, if I boot those up, I'm offered Mountain Lion or something. I'm not offered Mojave. So is there any way to deal with that firmware only, or must I run that macOS install?
Oh, are you talking about the firmware that handles? Excuse me.
APFS?
Yeah.
Sierra? Yeah.
Well, I discovered that too. That was a lot of fun that week.
Yeah.
That I couldn't go from what I had to that, and that was why. And APFS screwed me about something. But then I got lost in, okay, was it APFS that didn't work? Was it the firmware that was different? Did I kill the BIOS? All those things were just possibilities. So I'm just looking for some way to manually command that firmware to be the same as the others. Because if I'm going to go back to internet recovery every year and start, I need it to be the same already.
You mind if I tag on this one?
Please.
So again, back when I was at the school, that was one of the things we had to try to tackle, is how are we going to image these computers, And we ended up being able to block copy, say, High Sierra back to certain computers, but that was only after the whole
After the
.app
firmware.
installer, right? Yeah, and so I even tried to break it down. I'm like, oh, cool, I've got the firmware PKGs right here. If I just run this, it'll update firmware. I'll be good. There's some kind of magic going on in that .app. So, yeah.
It's buried in the installer, and it's the only way to get it is running the installer. It doesn't have to come from internet recovery. It is in the installer, but you have to manually run through an install process to get that firmware down once. And then after that, you can do whatever you need.
And you're
to.
saying you believe or you're sure that the StartOS command that we've talked about
Yeah.
can do that?
Yeah, because that command is officially sanctioned by Apple and is
Okay.
their approved way of doing things,
Gotcha.
so we're not doing anything goofy
So I
there.
can carry around a USB stick and
Yep.
do all of them that way.
You could,
And then I'm ready for
Yeah.
thin imaging or whatever we're
Whatever.
calling DEP
Yep.
style.
If you're
Thank you.
if you're thinking about running the installer from a storage device like a USB thumb drive or a larger one, there's a StartOS command in there to excuse me, it's not StartOS, it's create install media. Yeah, so there's even an app that does it for you, like a free open source app called DiskMaker X. And so yeah, that one's really great actually.
Anything else?
Last question.
Real simple question. You said the slide deck is going to be available?
Yes.
Where's that? Where do I grab that at?
Do you guys know that?
Yeah, because I didn't know where the link was. Oh,
Last year I went on the website and got all of them.
okay.
Okay.
Hey, and I'll see me after. I can give you my email if you need it. I can get it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, please join me in thanking Brian and Bennett for their time.